I will introduce our next speaker, Emily Whitman. She is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Aerospace Futures Alliance. The Alliance's goal is to strengthen the entire aerospace industry in Washington and to establish strategic plans for implementation. She's an experienced coalition builder and advocate for Washington communities at all legislative levels. She holds a bachelor's, let me restate that. She holds 2 bachelor's degrees in political science and law and societies and justice from the University of Washington. Please welcome Emily Whitman.
Good morning, all. Just want to confirm that you can hear me. Outstanding. Thank you. Well, it is 8 a.m. over here in the Pacific Northwest region, which means that I have donned business casual, let's say, for the first time this month. But it seems like we're doing that more and more now that we have these digital connections available. So thank you so much for inviting the Aerospace Futures Alliance to participate in today's conversation. It's already been really useful and informative. A lot of information again for 8 a.m. here, but it's been great. So I'm going to share my screen. Apologies. We are a tech-centric state, and sometimes it defeats us. But that's the fun of the challenge. So again, thank you so much. I am Emily Whitman. I am the President and CEO of the Aerospace Futures Alliance. And since 2018, we have had the pleasure of also running the Washington State Space Coalition, which of course is the focus of our conversation here today. As mentioned, AFA is the state's trade association for aerospace companies and communities. That community piece, again, is reflected today and is really critical because we know that for every one space-specific startup or company that we have in the state of Washington, we have an entire ecosystem of community members that support it, whether it is parents, most importantly, students, teachers, all the way from our K through 12 system, especially in our apprenticeship programs that we have here in Washington State. And then of course at our 4-year universities like the University of Washington and Washington State University that provide top space related talent for our local companies. We have about 1,400 aerospace specific suppliers in Washington State, and so many of them are skewing and pivoting into the commercial space industry. For those companies who have been really impacted by COVID-19 this last year, as we probably all know, any defense contract or any commercial space contract has really been providing a revenue source and a source of support for those companies to make it through while the commercial aerospace market is at a downturn. And part of that that's really exciting is it's freed up a lot of folks to get creative, to have really clean shop floors, but to also focus on research and innovation projects that they wouldn't have had the time, though they certainly don't necessarily have the resources right now to do. And so we've seen so much collaboration happening within our space ecosystem here in Washington State, connecting our aerospace suppliers, our traditional aerospace suppliers, and our growing space companies. So as mentioned, we are AFA. We took over the Washington State Space Coalition in 2018. That was a group that was brought forward in 2014 by the Washington State Department of Commerce. Here in Washington State, we have a really robust public-private partnership. Oftentimes public gets there first, which is great. And so they saw a need to bolster the Washington State space community as a growing sector. What we traditionally don't talk about in Washington State is how we've actually been a space powerhouse for a long time, since the 60s and before. So we have always had the Kent Space Center, which is Kent is a city in Washington, a little bit south of Seattle. But they are the ones who we've put so much technology on, Galileo and other types of initial legacy space programs funded by the public. And now we are continuing our legacy by really becoming an entrepreneurial powerhouse and supplying to the private space sector. So Washington State has had this sort of untold legacy of space excellence for so long in a way that we don't necessarily tell in the way that the Space Coast might, or that folks think about Alabama or Texas as these space powerhouses, Colorado even. When I was first starting this work, I would look at all of the different space-related state advocacy websites in the US. And I was really surprised to see that, almost every one of our 50 states and maybe a territory claim to have a space presence and a space interest, and they certainly do. But we were really deficient in the way that Washington State was telling our history and our legacy and our current status. So that is part of the reason that the Washington State Space Coalition was pulled together. And it really does fit in with our vision at the Aerospace Futures Alliance, which is that we are the recognized center of aerospace innovation and excellence around the world, and that our aerospace industry gets stronger every year. So the specific intent of the Washington State Space Coalition is we really get our hands dirty, we get into the weeds to grow and strengthen our state space industry. So we have conducted many space-related economic development impact studies, trying to provide the critical information to our lawmakers about the number of jobs and number of companies and the economic, therefore tax revenue impact that our companies have. We hold conferences and meetings similar to this so that folks can interact and collaborate and find those opportunities for co-innovation. As I said before, we really saw a need to raise the profile of Washington State space industry. So we have specific marketing materials. We also wanted to increase the public perception about the industry. In particular, and you'll hear in a second, Washington State is a very entrepreneurial-led space industry, but that also means that big names like Amazon and others really have a strong narrative, as you can imagine, in the Seattle area. And we often have to disassociate or combat the overarching Amazon narrative from the Blue Origin mission and the work that they're doing when we're specifically talking to our lawmakers. We also support business-to-business activities, which we'll hear about in a second. And of course, we always want to support business retention, growth, and attraction. So I would be remiss if I didn't say that Washington State truly is the best state for space. And if you are interested in learning more about Washington as a place for your company, please let myself or the Department of Commerce know. So as I mentioned, we typically do economic impact studies and other type of information and data gathering to better tell our story in Washington State. So we recently, thankfully, funded through actually Federal CARES Act resiliency funds, not the previous package that was passed, but the one passed early last year. And we received funding through Snohomish County Economic and Workforce Recovery Task Force. Snohomish County is the county where the Boeing Everett facility is and has a very strong cluster of aerospace and space component suppliers. It is just north of King County, where Seattle is located. And we really looked at what we had within our ecosystem, the technologies that we're leading on, the ecosystem of support, the universities, the research institutions, but then of course getting a real perspective on what the opportunity is. And so by perspective, you'll see at this chart here, Boeing commercial airplane revenue, at least in 2019, was closer to $32 billion, whereas we see Washington State's opportunity for a space sector on par with eventually the aerospace industry in Washington State in the global satellite manufacturing space, and then of course a little bit less in the global launch services. But you can see we have a long way to go before these are really viable, overwhelming financial and revenue generating options for aerospace suppliers. So we've definitely taken that into consideration when thinking about how best to serve our space sector companies, our OEMs, as well as trying to help anybody in Washington State who wants to recover from COVID and use space as a new revenue source and a new partnership source to do that. We tell them, you're not going to get the big checks that you're going to get from commercial aerospace right away, but if you're a great partner and you work closely with the industry at this point, it really is on a trajectory to grow into another powerhouse, just like commercial aerospace has been. Here are some of the companies we have in Washington State. You can see the diversity in the technology and process innovation that we have. We have Planet Labs doing volume manufacturing. We have Tethers Unlimited and Chimeta in advanced communications. We have space, cloud, and AI with Microsoft, obviously. Love to shout out to my alma mater, to the University of Washington. They have a specific UW Husky SAT, which was launched last year. That is a mini satellite that was developed exclusively by students at the University of Washington at our storied aerospace program there. So very exciting. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, we beat our traditional football competitive university rival in Washington State University, to space. They will be launching a future project if it hasn't gone up already. But you can see that our universities really take this industry seriously, and our students are really passionate and excited and very skilled at it. Within additive manufacturing, we have Relativity Space, and we have Northrop in autonomy and robotics. And what I mentioned before is a little bit different than how other states have been, I guess, supported over time. So for example, we think about the Space Coast, we think about a specific federal or defense space presence in those other states. Washington State is completely unique. That Boeing Space Center actually shut down. So we currently don't have a specific federally funded or clustered spot in Washington State that is exclusively doing defense space and funneling federal dollars into that work that then creates a ecosystem of suppliers and manufacturers around it. Washington is a space state, and it's really fueled by our entrepreneurs. So obviously Jeff Bezos, though he's no longer technically the CEO of Amazon, he is stepping up to being on the board there so he can focus better on Blue Origin and the work that they're doing. We have, of course, Blue Origin in Kent. There is Leo Stella down in the Tukwila area, south of Seattle. We have a huge SpaceX presence here. We have, of course, storied companies like Aerojet Rocketdyne in Redmond, who have been working on rocket engines and other components since that Boeing Space Center was around. So we really have an entrepreneurial spirit, and this was a bit of a mind shift when we were talking to our traditional aerospace suppliers in Washington State, because they're used to marketing themselves to a Boeing company or to an Airbus. When we talked to our space companies, they really see themselves as being on the cutting edge, as being innovators, as being closer, they see themselves as technology companies, just like a, Microsoft or a Google is trying to develop the next, AR, VR technology and push the limits there. They see themselves as pushing the limits of innovation within space, rather than a manufacturer or a developer of a vehicle that happens to travel, through our atmosphere into space, rather than across the globe, like a Boeing airplane would. So we really had to shift our mentality of how we approach and market ourselves to those space companies and market ourselves as potential partners. This is a quick screen grab of some companies that we have here in Washington State: Black Sky, RBC Signals, Kymeta I've mentioned, Blue Origin, Spaceflight Industries, Aerojet Rocketdyne, Sistema Technologies, Janicki, Explore, and then you can see as well our consulting and training opportunities, our education and research opportunities, as well as the great Museum of Flight. If you haven't been in the Seattle area, please check out the Museum of Flight. So I pause here to say what we've really learned from that study that I mentioned. We've learned that there are at least 40 space companies in Washington State that do specific space. These aren't companies that, worked in a different industry and have pivoted, were a, more traditional aerospace supplier and have pivoted. These are really, smart, creative startups or established space companies in the Washington State area. We are almost exclusively entrepreneurial, as I mentioned. And then the needs of our specific space company that we've been paying attention to, we're really excited about needing rapid testing infrastructure and building an ecosystem where we have that rapid testing infrastructure as a resource for our space companies or national or international space companies to come to Washington State and use. We are looking forward to a thermal vacuum for satellites. That's a piece of infrastructure that we are very interested in advocating for. And I know I'm almost out of time, but I just wanted to mention there's a real opportunity here in Washington State, again, because we have been hit so hard by the economic impacts of COVID-19. Many of our companies that we surveyed in the Snohomish County area reported that they had lost 47% of their annual revenue in 2020 just due to the economic downturn, and they lost 23% of their headcount if they had to furlough, lay off, or let go any other type of really skilled employee that they had. So what they've been doing instead, as I mentioned, is trying to balance that overhead and that operational support within their budgets and really getting creative and looking for new opportunities to partner. I keep sharing this, but a Harvard Business Review looked at companies that had a couple of strategies in the 2008 recession and what their recovery looked like. And by far, it showed that companies that balanced cutting or limiting or scaling down operational overhead, but really investing their time, energy, and any resources that they had in research and innovation and development of new technologies. They came out twice as well in the recovery market than their competitors did, who just scaled down or who just constricted their services. And so I say that because our aerospace employers right now are really looking for any opportunity to partner or collaborate on the needs of any space company. We are creative, innovative, and we have the passion and drive to help you with your next piece of technology or help solve your next problem. So we are happy to provide any type of business-to-business connection. You're welcome to contact me. And of course, we will just continue advocating on behalf of Washington State space industry, making sure that we are a supportive business ecosystem for any type of company to do business here, but in particular, any interested space company. So Michael, I will stop there and stop sharing my screen so I can see all your faces, and happy to take any questions.
Terrific, Emily. Thank you. Thank you so much for being a part of our event and talking about we have a very vibrant space community in the region. We're not the first place you think of, right? You think of Florida, you think of Texas, think of California, but pound for pound, we are about to become the largest satellite producer in the world, right? Can you talk a little bit about that, what that evolution looked like, what kind of numbers we're looking at, and why it's so interesting? How did we become, the satellite capital of the world?
I will be the first to say that I don't want to talk out of school, so I won't throw any numbers at you. But the reason why we have that innovation and that talent here is, again, because we aren't necessarily doing big launches. We always say that's great if you want a big piece of empty scrubland, where there's nothing really going on. Texas is your spot. You can go buy a really big, acres and acres of scrubland where you can test rockets and burn as much as you want and do lift, and that's great. But here we have a really dense ecosystem of that innovation and talent. And when it comes to satellites in particular, I think it really comes from who the other talent attractors were in the state. So obviously we have been really skilled at sensor technology within the area with our expertise in commercial aerospace. I mean, we've been building airplanes here since the first one, really, when Bill Boeing needed a better airplane. And I am a true believer that Boeing's presence and the first set of computers that went into an aircraft really did attract actually our tech innovation that we have, the Microsofts afterwards, right? We had this ecosystem of software engineers before anybody really knew what a software engineer was, or anybody had a personal computer. They were flying with computers before they probably really even saw one. So I think that's why we have this long expertise in the area. And then again, because massive launch vehicles, there's a lot of competition out there for that, and we really saw that satellite manufacturers were skilled here. I think of Leo Stella, which is a really interesting partnership, right, between, I believe it's Thales Alenia Space and a local company that was here in Tukwila. Sorry, Spaceflight. Yeah, sorry, I saw you mouth it. Exactly, and because we had Spaceflight here, and they were looking for, again, a partnership where they didn't necessarily have to acquire. I think traditional aerospace is so heavy in M&A It's like if you want a new piece of technology, you just buy the company at the right time to acquire it. They really wanted a collaborative partnership that would be able to support both companies, but with a specific mission that may have been outside of their traditional lanes. So I will stop there. If any other questions, let me know. I know we have, I think, 10 minutes left.
Yeah, no, we're good. We're good. You know, I'll make a point about space flight, and the Andrews family. Dana Andrews was a professor at University of Washington's Aero Astro department long before there was a space flight in a Leo Stella. Like that professor's been here for 30-ish years, right? And you know, you mentioned your alma mater. The Foundation for the Future is going to host an event with them, co-developed an event with them. I'm pretty sure it's going to be in November. Their Spark group at Aero Astro is really remarkable. Like as an organization, the things that they're doing. You mentioned the Husky Sat. Regionally, we have a lot of kind of local treasures, right? Aerojet just got bought by, you know, I think the number is $4.4 billion. So good for them for that. You know, and so we have this heritage and history really primarily in the Kent Valley, but stretching north and south all the way to Vancouver and all the way to Portland, that this kind of innovation culture has made our space community kind of independent. Like the closest NASA center is something like 900 miles away down at NASA Ames. That's the closest site. So we've built everything that we've built organically. Some of it was certainly spurred by the lunar lander that Kent built for Boeing. Kent, by the way, for those folks that don't know, is a very strong industrial town about 30 miles south of Seattle. So that region helped build the original lunar landers. In fact, they're doing some really big historic work related to that as well. So we have that kind of history and legacy. You know, your organization is the Aerospace Futures Alliance. So we talk a lot about what does the near future look like, 2022, 2025, you know, make predictions, crystal ball, where we're going to be in 2035. What does next year look like industry-wise? And where does that put us, you know, a couple of years out? Any guesses? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I put all of our speakers on the spot about their crystal ball.
Yeah, my answer in 2019 would have been very different, obviously.
Yeah, right.
What my big, I guess the question too is, and I ask this of all my speakers, is, you know, what keeps you up at night, right? And I'm really worried that we won't have the opportunity that keeps that talent here in order to, you know, try and fail. Like you mentioned, you know, the Andrews family, you know, spaceflight spun out of Andrews Space, which doesn't exist anymore, right? But we were able to keep that talent and that innovation and that collaboration within our ecosystem because there were other opportunities, other job opportunities, research opportunities, funding opportunities to do that. I think what next year looks like is if you were able to survive 2020, and then if you were able to survive 2021, it's very disheartening. So AFA does work at the federal level as well, and we've been advocating for aerospace specific support within any type of recovery package. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Representative Rick Larson and the work that he is doing to try to get specific payroll support for aerospace employers, simply because, like I said, a lot of our companies haven't had a revenue check in going on maybe 12 months more. And if those folks are just getting bought out, or there is a parent company that comes in that just has a completely different vision and doesn't give you as much latitude for research, technology, innovation, and creativity, I worry that we're going to lose that entrepreneurial spirit simply because we have fewer partners, or we have maybe more stilted, missions that we have to stick into. So I would say that we look at programs like AFWorks that just are really exciting. Say what you will about the last administration, at least within the public-private partnership and the resources that were given through that program, were really an opportunity for traditional aerospace suppliers to get into space. We hear so much from our space partners that they don't really want an untested partner, which I completely get, especially in this risk environment. But the more that we can, as we mentioned, HuskySat, the more that we can show proven technology that's been successfully operated in space, that's great. So hopefully we continue to see more federal resources through the Biden administration for recovery. I've mentioned some of our infrastructure wish list that we have, these vacuum chambers and things. We are specifically looking for a infrastructure recovery package by the Biden administration to provide opportunities for that type of capital investment, because we know that everybody wants it. And then we show the business case and the couple, multi-million-dollar paycheck. And, I think private sector sometimes they want it and they can help, but they really look to the public sector to provide that funding for it. And we are really tapped within the public sector, at least in Washington State, as far as our revenue resources at the state budget level. So I would say that's what I see for next year. Is if you survived, then you're in a really strong position. If you invested in research and development partnerships, you're in a really strong position to come out when the market returns to somewhat normal. And then, of course, I cannot wait to get my vaccine. I cannot wait for everyone to get their vaccine so that we can all start flying again. Once we have a really strong, robust commercial aerospace sector, it just lifts all boats, takes the pressure off, and provides that much more, opportunity for that innovative collaboration. So I'm excited to fly again.
Cool. I want to bring on Paul Jurison, Professor Jurison, in a moment. Paul, we only have just 3 minutes to keep on schedule. I want to talk about the convergence between the digital side of space and the hardware side of space. Professor Jurison is at Cal Poly and has a strong connection in with AWS. So please, Paul, ask your question.
Yeah, so we have a partnership with Amazon Web Services at Cal Poly, and we have an innovation center where we're partners there. One of the things that we know is important is the ability to process data, right? So space generates a lot of data, lots of sensors up there. AWS has a ground station capability. I think you mentioned that, Emily. And they're collecting a lot of data, getting it into the cloud and doing analysis there as well. But there's also, I think, an opportunity for, we talk about the cloud on Earth, but a cloud in space to be able to collect that data, use artificial intelligence, for example, to be able to do predictive operations in space, and then of course in the whole cislunar area. Wondering a little bit about how we could really enhance that opportunity as well, because manufacturing is great, but you have to do something with the data the equipment's producing.
Yeah, and I'm sad that one of my favorite representatives in Washington State, Representative Matt Banky, isn't able to, at least he didn't pre-speak before me. His background is just fascinating, and if there's anyone who gets that, especially from a cybersecurity perspective, it is him. And so when we look to a legislator that has the foresight for that type of opportunity, it's really him. And so then again, that comes down to who pushes. Do we have a industry-led demand for it? I think that's where we see things moving really quickly. Or does the state or the federal government need to provide a specific mission or a specific push to, make that happen. And so he really, I think, would be able to talk about that. I think it's probably within his vision. And if you need to contact him, you can talk to Michael or myself. But I think there's a ripe opportunity for it. Again, my mind goes straight towards if you can make it a national security or a defense mission. Of course, I think people get very romantic about, our trip to the moon back in the 60s, but we have to remember the context within which we did that, right? It was very political, and it was, definitely, not fear-based from a national security perspective. That's what the motivation was. So I'm really seeing an opportunity to work at the state and federal level to push that conversation, because you're right. Data, of course, takes a bunch of power, and we have great, cheap, and environmentally friendly power here in the state of Washington. I know we send a lot of it down to California, so you're welcome for that. But we have many places, including Representative Banky's legislative district, that are just full of data centers and full of opportunities for that type of work. So thanks so much.
Okay, y'all, thank you very much. I appreciate it. We're going to swing it back over to Lila. Emily, really appreciate you being here. If you wouldn't mind posting your connections, LinkedIn and the website into the chat so folks can get in touch with you.
Awesome.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, all.
Yep.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you, Emily. That was very insightful.